For more than 60 years, every American president has inherited the same question. Can Washington and Moscow ever build a stable relationship, or are they trapped in permanent rivalry? The faces changed, the slogans changed, the world changed, but again and again the pattern returned. Crisis, temporary thaw, renewed distrust, and another collision. From the Cuban Missile Crisis to the war in Ukraine, the story of U.S.-Russia relations is not just a story about two governments. It is a story about nuclear fear, competing empires, broken promises, shifting presidents, and the repeated hope that this time, somehow, the relationship could be reset. In the early 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union were not simply rivals. They were the two most dangerous powers on Earth. Under John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev, that rivalry nearly became a nuclear catastrophe during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. When the United States discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, the world came closer to nuclear war than at any other moment in the Cold War. What mattered about that crisis was not just the danger. It was the lesson both sides learned from it. Direct confrontation could destroy them both. That lesson shaped everything that followed. Even when Washington and Moscow remained enemies, they now had proof that rivalry needed limits. Carter, Afghanistan, and the collapse of the thaw under Jimmy Carter. Hopes for a more stable relationship were shattered by the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in late 1979. That invasion transformed the mood in Washington. The United States responded with sanctions, grain embargoes, export restrictions, and a boycott of the 1980 Moscow Olympics. The message was clear. Détente had not ended the rivalry. It had only paused the most dangerous part of it. This is one of the most important patterns in the whole story. Again and again, U.S. presidents tried to reduce tensions with Moscow. And again, a geopolitical shock reversed the trend. When Ronald Reagan entered office, the relationship hardened again. The rhetoric became sharper, military competition intensified, and nuclear fear returned to the center of global politics. But the 1980s did not end the way they began. The arrival of Mikhail Gorbachev changed the tempo of history. A period that opened in confrontation moved toward negotiation, summits, and eventually real arms reductions. The landmark GNF Treaty of 1987 eliminated an entire class of nuclear missiles. That mattered not only because it reduced weapons, but because it proved something deeper. Even after years of hostility, leaders in Washington and Moscow could still change the direction of the relationship when political conditions aligned. Then came the biggest rupture of all, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Suddenly, the Cold War's central structure was gone. Under George H.W. Bush and then Bill Clinton, the United States no longer faced the Soviet Union, but a weaker Russian Federation struggling through political and economic upheaval. For many in the West, this looked like the beginning of a post-Cold War order, in which Russia might eventually be integrated into a U.S.-led international system. But Moscow did not experience the 1990s as a story of comfortable integration. Many Russians experienced it as decline, humiliation, and lost influence. That gap in perception mattered enormously. One side believed history had moved forward, the other believed it had been pushed backward. The 1990s were not just about Russian weakness. They were also about a new European security order, and that is where the seeds of future conflict deepened. In 1997, NATO and Russia signed the Founding Act, creating a formal basis for consultation and cooperation. On paper, this looked like a framework for coexistence. But the same broader era also saw NATO enlargement, which many in Russia came to view not as stabilization, but as the steady movement of a military alliance toward its borders. This tension became even sharper in 2008, when NATO declared at the Bucharest summit that Ukraine and Georgia would become members. From the Western point of view, this reflected sovereign choice. From the Russian point of view, it threatened the strategic buffer zone that Moscow considered vital. Obama's reset, the last serious attempt at repair. When Barack Obama entered office, his administration tried to reverse the downward spiral. The word was reset. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton famously presented a symbolic reset button to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in 2009. The Obama administration later argued that the reset produced concrete achievements, including cooperation and the signing of the New START Treaty in 2010. For a brief period, this looked like another possible turning point. New START reduced deployed strategic warheads and restored an important structure of verification and predictability. But even this reset contained the central weakness that had haunted the relationship for decades. Tactical cooperation did not erase strategic mistrust. The two governments could agree on some issues, while still moving apart on the deeper question of Europe's future order: Crimea, election interference, and the collapse of trust. The break came hard in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea. The United States responded with sanctions, and NATO suspended practical cooperation with Russia while keeping some channels for dialogue open. After that, trust did not simply weaken, it changed category. The relationship was no longer just strained, it was structurally hostile again. Then came another turning point. U.S. intelligence assessments concluded that Russia interfered in American elections as part of a broader influence effort. At that point, Russia was no longer only a foreign policy problem in Washington. It became part of America's internal political conflict as well. That shift was profound. Once a rival becomes part of domestic political warfare, repairing the relationship becomes far more difficult because diplomacy itself starts to look suspicious. Trump, ambiguity, and the politics of unpredictability. Donald Trump's first term added another layer of complexity. His rhetoric toward Russia often sounded less confrontational than that of many figures in Washington, yet the broader U.S. system remained deeply suspicious of Moscow. This produced a strange duality. Public language sometimes suggested openness, but the institutional relationship remained shaped by sanctions, distrust, and unresolved conflict. In that sense, Trump did not solve the Russia problem. He exposed it. He showed that even when a U.S. president signals interest in a different tone, the underlying structure of rivalry may be too entrenched to unwind quickly. Biden, full-scale war and a new era of confrontation. Then came February the 24th, 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. That invasion transformed U.S.-Russia relations more dramatically than anything since the end of the Cold War. Washington moved into large-scale support for Ukraine, expanded sanctions, and treated the war as a defining security crisis for Europe and the broader international order. By early 2025, the U.S. State Department said the United States had provided tens of billions of dollars in military assistance to Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began. In effect, the relationship had moved beyond tension and into sustained geopolitical confrontation.